Grit, a Detroit Lions podcast. Powered by the Monroe County Reporters. Here are your hosts, Jason Harwood and Jacob Litton.
To another episode of Talking Schlitt. Yes, we are changing the name of the show for this one time only. I am your host, Jason Harwood. With me is Jacob Litton. And also, obviously, you see him on the screen. And if you're listening at home, you already know the man is here. The managing editor over at Pride Detroit, the co-host of Lions Breakdown podcast, and at the POD Midweek Mailbag podcast, which was actually midweek this week. So that was cool. Thank you, Eric, for showing up during draft time. This is when we love to have you on, and I know you're a busy man, so thanks for making time for us.
Yeah, of course. It's nice to be back again. It's been a little bit of a break since we've talked last, but I'm glad that we got a chance to connect before the draft here.
Yeah, this is awesome. Because Eric does not like to self-promote, I'm going to do it on behalf of him. He has a Patreon. And I'll let you talk about it, Eric, and let people know how to sign up for it. I am a personal subscriber to it. It is the amount of information that you get, especially around this time, around draft time, is amazing. You get a nice color-coded spreadsheet. You get to see Eric's rankings of all the draft picks, all the 40 times, every statistic that you want to know, it's in there. We got depth charts. We got salary cap information. It's all in this spreadsheet. So if you want to keep up to date and be in the weeds with the Lions, cool. If you want just to know where the depth chart is, Eric's got you, and it's updated constantly. So, Eric, tell people how they could sign up for that Patreon.
Yeah, the easiest way that I found is if you just go to Google or any search engine and just type in the Detroit Lions Breakdown podcast and then Patreon. And then that usually takes you right to the homepage, and then there's some subscription options on the homepage. The original concept was just trying to create a way to monetize, or not really monetize, but like help fund the podcast, because we don't do advertising. It's all free for anybody to listen. And so we started this at a listener's request. They said, "Why don't you start a Patreon, and we'll, I'll give you some money and help you, pay for the website and all the equipment and stuff like that." Right. And as a way of giving back, I decided to try and put out some data sheets that I use throughout the season. And then this time of the year in the draft, one of the ways I track the draft is through an Excel document. I rank players, I put notes on these players, and then I color code them because that's what makes the most sense in my brain to understand them easily. And I've done this for 15 years or so, and I was encouraged to put it online and try and give it out to people. And so I just started giving that out to anybody who was subscribing to the podcast. And so now it's what I do. Every year I try and make this draft board with, like you said, all this Lions stuff. I try to gear the draft board towards the Lions, and it's a pretty fun document to look at. And it's something that I actually will go back and access in the years after the draft as well. So I've got a nice little catalog of them, and I can go back. I can see where players were ranked when they become free agents and the Lions acquire them, like what I thought of them at the draft time, etc. And so it's a fun thing, and it's a way that I like to be able to, give back to fans, and it's fun. It's a fun thing to do.
I can tell you how I personally use it is, especially this time of year, the draft. Like I kind of look where national writers have someone ranked, and then where Erik Schlitt has them ranked, and then I figure that guy's a better fit for the Lions. That's how my brain works. So then I'll either go to YouTube and look up some people's draft previews or the highlights, just to kind of get a gist of what this player is about. Yeah, it's awesome. Just so everyone's clear, I subscribe to like 3 things for the Lions: Eric's Patreon, the PODD, which I love. You get the weekly email. But to tell you what's worth for me is the daily training camp videos. Because by that time, I'm ready for football to start, and I just want to. You guys make it seem like we're there, which I really, really like. And then Justin Rogers is the other one that I subscribe to, and those are I can get a lot of information with just those services. There's other worthy ones out there, but those are just the ones that I personally subscribe to. So, all right, Eric, you don't know this, but we have a special guest that's coming on. I don't know how we got this with our limited budget, but Rod Wood is actually going to be on. Going to be on
Good.
the podcast. So we
Good.
have him. We're turning into Jerry Springer. You could just go off for a little. No, I'm just joking. No.
Yeah, I got a little heated in that PODD video with Rod Wood. So
That was the
right.
first time I ever heard you say the F word, to be honest with you. I think
I don't say it much.
Yeah.
I usually try and stay very family friendly, and it's been something that I've tried to keep as clean as I can. But I'm human.
Yeah, no, I got it. And
some situations call for a good old release of the F word, right?
Yeah, right. Like when I use it, I try to make it an impactful usage.
Yeah. Right.
All right, Jacob. I've been talking a lot here. First of all, how are you doing? I've talked to you in a little bit. How's everything going?
Really good. I'm remote now. Got a job like Jason, so have more time on my hands. I'm training in person, so I'm still not remote at home yet, but that's coming soon.
Yeah. He tried to send me a GIF earlier on the Teams chat and couldn't do it. He had to spend half his day trying to figure out how to send GIFs to me.
That took all of 3 minutes.
For us Tiger fans, Perez just hit a home run, broke the tie in the 8th inning. So that's a good thing. That's why I was doing a little cheer. But I'm glad you're doing good. Jacob, why don't we start with the first question, and I'll let you start off with Eric, what you got for him?
Okay, so we have to start with the grit index. We talked about it a lot last year, but just if you want to remind everyone what the grit index is, and then what, because it's coming out soon, I assume, right?
Yep.
And then what,
Yes.
what are you changing with it this year?
Yeah, it's been an evolving entity over the last 4 years. This is the 4th iteration of it. And so we've taken a look at what we've done in the last 3 years and then tried to find out what are we missing. And then we spent more time going through all of Brad Holmes's pressers and looking for key things that he is either consciously or subconsciously talking about when he's talking about players. What are common themes? What are the things that stand out most? And then we're incorporating that into the things we're looking for when we go through all the data that we're collecting. And so for those who aren't familiar with the grid index, it's essentially a way that we're trying to contextualize a player's intangibles, like what is their football character, what is their off the field character, what is their football IQ, what is their identity, like how are they wired as a person and a player. And then we're incorporating some athletic concepts into it this year. We're also going to try and marry my draft board and the grit index. I work with my buddy Anthony, who does a lot of the research for the grit index itself. And then I have spent more time on my board. And so we're almost like working independently trying not to influence one another. And then when we blend them together, we're going to try and come up with a usable understanding of a score of what a player's grit may be. And the important thing to remember here is that, well, a couple of things, but one of the main ones is we're collecting data from analysts who are breaking down players, and then they're writing profiles, and we're looking at those profiles and we're looking for key things in those profiles that indicate a player falls into one of these categories. And then we're scoring it. What is the intent of what the analyst is saying? What's the reputation of the analyst, et cetera, et cetera. And we collect all this data on these players throughout the college football season and the off season. And so we spend like a good 8 months on this project, just collecting data and putting it into this Excel sheet. And then at the end, we're going to have a grading scale. Last year we tried to scale it out to 100, and it wasn't super clean. So we've compressed it a little bit, scaled it on a 1 to 10. We're trying to make it like compatible to things like RAS, like that show the athletic testing. So that's pure athletics. And then this is going to be like the non-athletics. So you'll be able to see what's the RAS score, what's the grit score, and then, where are the rankings, and trying to give people an easier view and understanding of what a player has going for them beyond just what they show on the football field. And it had some success last year. We hit on some pretty good players. And so we're hoping that we can improve a little bit more and have even more success moving forward.
If I can recap real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was
ahead,
just going to recap just because you just mentioned it too. For anyone that didn't see the grit index last year, but you were high on Dan Jackson. That was a second tier player for you. We end up drafting him. Ahmed Hassanin, second tier. We end up drafting him. Isaac Teslaw was high, second tier. We end up getting him. Tate Ratledge, I think, was second overall in your offensive lineman. A first tier player. We get him in round 2. Miles Frazier was also kind of high up. I think the only one that we drafted that was not like in the top tier of the list was Tyleek Williams. So I just want to know, were you like, draft night, when that's coming, we're on the board. How big of a surprise was that Tyleek pick to you? Was that on your radar because of the position or
Yeah, because of the position, it was on my radar. I knew defensive tackle was going to be something they were interested in. And we had talked all off season about him being the best run defender in that class. And so I knew it was a possibility. I was I didn't appreciate his pass rush potential, I guess, as much as the Lions did. So I was thinking he might not sneak into the first round, but I did know he was stylistically a fit. The thing that stood out, or the thing with him, is there wasn't as many grit factors in what we were looking for that he had that stood out, which is why he missed. And so that's really what sparked our off-season, look at what we were doing or what we were missing, was because we did so good with the other guys, but we missed on Tyleek. And we were like, well, why? Well, what did we do? Is it just that Tyleek isn't a gritty player? Because that not every guy is going to be the grittiest player, right? But then, or is there something underlying that we just weren't able to kind of put our finger on? So yeah, with Ratledge was our third overall, period. Second highest lineman, third overall player. First 2 guys went off the board in the first round. And so when the Lions' second round pick came around, I was looking at him and saying, geez, he just makes too much sense. He should be the pick. And when it paid off, it was great because, it was a good reward for a lot of hard work.
Right.
Yeah. The only thing I'm going to add to the grid index, and I think you kind of touched on it, but I just want to be clear. It's not just on the field play. It's like what they
Yes.
do in the locker room. It's what they show off the field. Like what makes us that there's more to grit than what you see on the field. Because there's a lot of players that you see that play gritty, right? But they don't
Sure.
have like the leadership intangibles that I'm sure you're looking for, and other locker room presence and all that.
Yeah, like for example, Jacob mentioned Dan Jackson. Dan Jackson was pretty high on our board, not because he was a top, a day 2 player for us, but we thought of him as like a late day 3 prospect from a talent wise on the field, but from a grit standpoint, from an intangible standpoint, he was much higher up on the board because of the character of person that he is, because of the adversity he's overcome, and a whole variety of things along those lines. So, and I think people get confused with that because they'll look at a player like, and they'll say, oh my gosh, this guy is the grittiest football player on the field that I've ever seen. And then he'll get like maybe above average, but not elite. And they'll, say, oh, this is a terrible list. But that's not really what we're looking for. What we're looking for is, what do we see about this guy beyond just the football field?
And the Lion, and it should be included in your list because the Lions do that, right? I mean, like you see,
Yes.
like so many of their players that they draft. That's why they go to Iowa and like they go into
Mhm.
that school. Is that because like they get those type of players that are gritty, but also leadership guys. You see with Jack Campbell, those type of guys, like they're
Yeah.
just beyond just the football thing. So
Yeah,
I
Iowa.
appreciate that.
Since you mentioned it,
Yeah.
Iowa is like a grit factory. Man, the guys that they produce, it's startling how many guys that they have that just are going to be just littered all over the list, because that's what they do. That's the type of players that they recruit, and should be no surprise that this is a college that the Lions like to tap into.
Yeah, I guess you guys said something on the midweek mailbag today about Caden Proctor, and I didn't realize, and I don't know, Jacob, if you know this, that he had like a cup of coffee with Iowa didn't hang and went back to Alabama. So, like, to me, is that a red flag? I mean, the Lions are obviously have connections. They're going to find out the story there, but that is really interesting. Do you want to speak on
That's
that a
the
little bit, Eric?
Yeah, that's the biggest red flag with him. I know people are worried about his weight and stuff like that, or his ability to, maybe having to kick inside or something. I think he can play outside. I think he's talented enough to do those things. The issue that I wonder about is this is a kid who grew up in Iowa, went to Alabama, and when they had a coaching change, he transferred back to Iowa. Iowa got him out of the portal, and he was there for a little less than 2 months. He is quoted as saying he didn't feel like he meshed with their program, and so he transferred right back out after 2 months and went right back to Alabama again. And so for a team that is so heavily focused on these players that fit into the Iowa system, it certainly raises my ears, when I'm looking at why didn't he fit at Iowa? What was going on there? And I've heard rumors about some of the things that happened, but they're rumors, so I don't want to speak on them publicly, but
Mhm.
it sounds essentially like it wasn't a fit between him and the coaching staff, and he didn't think that he fit in well with what that team represented. And so that does raise some red flags for me. Now, maybe he has his reasonings, and maybe the Iowa coaches will dismiss it as not as big of a deal as maybe we're making it out to be. There could certainly be answers to all these questions that I have about him, but I'm just, I don't know what those are, but from my seat, there's certainly things that raise my, my red flag and say, hey, might be something underlying here going on.
Yep. I'm gonna give a shout out to Dan Pask. I know that he listens to your show. He listens to our show too, and he wants to say hi. He has a question for you, Eric. Do you think there's going to be a lot of first round trades? Dan says, "I'm not feeling it personally with the limited blue chip players." Do you think that's going to limit to more trades, or
Yeah, with limited players, I think if you're going to see trades, it's going to be for those guys, right? So there's going to be a couple of guys that you may see teams get aggressive for. The most popular one is Dallas trading up to try and get Sonny Styles, Sony Styles. So like he's a blue chip player. Styles is a blue chip player. So would Dallas trading up for him? Sure, that makes sense to go up and get a guy like that. But once you get past that kind of initial wave, it's going to be a lot harder to trade for players unless you're looking for something specific and you're worried that maybe that's the last first round pick you have on your board, and so you want to go up and get him. But it's going to level out pretty quick, and I think that actually will limit the amount of trades that happen. If they do happen, I think they'll be early.
I don't know. I I not to disagree with you, but sometimes
No,
I think when there's like a bunch of people bunched up, people get scared. Like if they want a specific player,
sure.
that might cause a jump up. Now you might limit the amount you get in return because they might, there might be some, they got to weigh those balances. But I'm curious. I mean, trades are always fun, right? You like
Yeah.
it's fun to watch that. So
Look, about the half the people in charge in the NFL, whether it's owners or GMs or coaches, they operate scared. They do. Like they make decisions because they're worried about losing their jobs. And so you see guys jump at things when maybe they shouldn't. And
Mhm.
that's just the nature of running this multi-billion-dollar organization and $32 billion teams out there, right? So
Yeah.
I don't think Detroit operates scared, which is enjoyable to root for.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they certainly do. All right, I'm going to ask a question here. I let Jacob, I let Dan. It's my turn now. I treat, just so you know, Eric, I treat this like my own personal midweek mailbag. Save up all these questions, so I'm super excited about this. All right, so if the Lions remain at 17, so no trades like we just talked about,
Mhm.
realistically, a player that would realistically be there, how many are you running up to the podium to say, that the Lions should be picking this guy?
So, okay, if we're eliminating like the blue chip guys,
Yeah, we're
and
eliminating well,
okay,
Bane might be different because of the stuff that just came out, but like to say Dave
Mhm.
Bailey, Arrell Reese, like those type of guys, probably are not going to be there. But realistically, you're not thinking of trading back. You have a card and you're ready to go.
Yeah, if one of I do think Maui Noah and Fano are above the rest. Like I do think they're a tier above the rest of the offensive tackles. And so it's not a huge gap, but it's enough of a gap for me that I think they're above. And so if one of those guys were to slide because somebody takes a gamble, somebody's like, I want Freeling because he's young and the upside's there and he's a left tackle. And then a guy like Fano gets pushed down or something. I wouldn't hesitate on that. Those guys are, they're not quite blue chip, but they're that next tier down. They're going to be an above average starter who have a chance to be all pros or Pro Bowls at some point in their career. I'm going to take that. It's harder to come by at a lot of the other positions because there's not like clear differences between, like those first tier guys and those second all the time. I would say you could make that argument at safety and corner. There's a couple of guys at the top, but at the same time, is that a pressing need? Are those guys maybe going to be there at 17, or could they maybe slide because of an injury, or, the position's not highly prioritized by NFL teams? Same thing with tight end. Like, I really like Sadiq, but like, I think at 17, like he could go there or he could go a little bit later. And I don't think that would be a priority for the Lions. So if you're taking like Bailey and Bain off the table and Styles and Downs and Reese, right? I really think the next group, the tackles, offer that best benefit. So if those top couple of guys slide, I think the Lions would definitely take that card and just go and not even worry about trying to entertain trades or anything or anything like that. I think they'd take them and be happy.
Yeah, that's about what I was thinking too. Jacob, I'll let you go.
Yeah, so just if we're staying on that, kind of goes with what you had. Blake Miller is a name that keeps getting linked to the Lions. Do you think that he's worthy of taking at 17? Let's say those guys you just mentioned, if all the tackles are off the board and Blake Miller is like, at the top of the Lions draft board, do you think he's worthy of taking at 17? Or do you think if he's the best one, the Lions pivot and just draft best player available?
So once you get past Maui Noah and Fano, the next tier of tackle is like there's 5 guys that I think are going to be relatively close to each other, but they're going to vary in what order they are depending on the team. For the Lions, I think Miller is going to be at the top of that group. So he's going to be OT3 on my Lions-based board. I would take him over Freeling, even though I know Freeling is the exciting guy. I would understand if the Lions wanted to take Freeling because the ceiling on him is so high. But for me, Blake Miller there's so many intangibles that he has, so many gritty things that he does, that he fits very well with what the Lions want to do. Playing on the right side, loads of experience, ready to go from day one. He doesn't miss time. He's all about the team, all about his teammates. And there's background, there's style, like his wrestling background. He's a leader. There's so many intangibles that make this guy such a good fit. I would absolutely I would take him at 17 if the other 2 guys are gone. Totally comfortable with that. I've taken him in several mock drafts that I've been part of. SB Nation did a mock draft. I took him in that. I did my own personal mock draft, the 7th round. I took him in that. Right. So and the only reason I didn't take him in the fan mock at POD was because Fano was there. So, right. So I'm very comfortable with Blake Miller. I started trying to get people's eyes on him a little while ago because I saw all the grittiness and intangibles with him, but he was being talked about as like a 2nd round pick. And I was like, he's not going to be a 2nd round pick. By the time people get eyes on him, he's going to start moving up the boards. And that's kind of how it's played out. Like, we've seen a lot of guys climb up the boards, and Miller, it's just been a steady climb to a guy that's expected to go in the teens now. So I think he'd be a perfect fit.
Okay. Yeah, that's why, because he keeps getting mocked in the mock. Some of them are go late 1st round, and so,
Yeah.
and So my question, I guess, follow up would be, so I mean, you project him to go in the teens, so maybe this point is moot.
Yes.
But let's just say for the national people feel that he would go later.
Mhm.
Say you passed on Blake, Blake Miller's available. You decide, I'm gonna trade back because we have these amount of tackles all evenly spaced, and let's pick up an extra third round pick. All right. So would you rather have Blake Miller at 17 or Ihanator and additional picks? Like if you were given that option, what would be your choice?
I guess it would depend on what he ends up garnering, because I do think Ahanature is a very good stylistic fit for the Lions as well. He's going to fit in, like I said, the difference between them is going to be minimal, right? I just think Miller has just that many more intangibles. So if Brad Holmes is looking at this draft and saying, I need to get a third, I'm going to trade back because I think Miller and Ahanachu are almost equal on my board, I would understand that. I would get it. It goes a bit against the grain for what Brad does. Brad usually is like, this is my guy, I'm going to pick him. But if they're that close and he thinks he could acquire it and he was comfortable getting either guy after a trade back, I would understand that. I would be okay with that too. My gut is, though, he sticks and picks.
Jacob, are you up or am I up? I kind of just stole that last part of that question for you.
It's good. I'll go.
All
I'll
right.
go back up to the top of our questions though, because we're skipping. So I guess basically the Lions, we're gonna need some cheap starters, right? We need more players. Do you think the draft philosophy goes back to what it was in 2021, 2022, with a less focus on long-term developmental prospects and more players that can impact and help right now? Do you think the draft philosophy is gonna go back to that, or do you think Brad Holmes is set on what he's doing? And that, there's going to be a mid-round pick that's a project player here.
Yeah, I really think he's kind of flipped things this year very deliberately. And so that does make things very unpredictable. But what we've seen is almost like a return to those 21, 22 years when they were looking for hungry players who have a chip on their shoulder, who are ready to contribute. They're in a significantly better spot with their roster than they were in either of those 2 years, right? But they're trying to get back to some of those basics and the things that they did well in order to ascend to the NFC Championship game, right? So they are, because they're going back to that, it does kind of point to me, especially with the way that they've left, they've tried to acquire talent with like some 1-year veterans and stuff like that in free agency. It does kind of point to me that they're looking for guys that can contribute now. At the same time, I do think Brad is always kind of eyeing on the future. The way this draft is constructed, though, I think you're going to get quality players through the 4th round that can probably come in and contribute right away, which means those guys that are in like the 5th and the 6th round, are those your project guys? Are those pieces that you're going to use to try and trade up? You're going to use them as draft capital. Like, what's going to happen with those later round picks? That's what I'm not so clear on. But I think if they stick with the 4 picks that they have in the first 4 rounds, I think they're going to look for guys that can contribute right now. Because just to kind of, we've talked a little bit about the fact that it's light at the top. There's not a lot of blue chip players. I think I only have 4 this year. And then the first round picks after that are decent. It's a fair amount. There's going to be a good player there at 17. But then once you get like past like 25, talent level starts to even out between 25 and 50. And then once you get to 50, it starts to even out between 50 and 150. And so you end up having guys where there's not going to be a ton of separation between them. There's going to be a good big group of 100 guys. So this is like a thick in the middle draft, right? You're going to there's a lot of good players there. Once you get back then you're starting to, a lot of them are going to just be projects. They're going to be special teamers and stuff like that, and developmental guys. So if they want to get as many picks in that top 150, I think that's a great strategy to have because you're going to get quality players. So you talk about trading back from 17 to get a third. great. You're going to get a potentially another quality player. If you're talking about packaging up 5th and 6th round picks to try and move up, great. You're going to get some quality players. My philosophy, if I'm Brad Holmes in this draft, is I'm going to try and get as many players between 1 and 150 as I can, because that's really where the high level talent is this year.
All right. I'm going to piggyback on that because I got a question for you. Jacob, just to be clear, Jacob and I love Isaac Tesla. This is not a slight on Tesla, but I want to revisit that trade based on what you just told me.
Mhm.
We gave up, last year's 3rd round pick. We moved up and get him, but then we also gave up 81 and 100 this year. So knowing what you know about the players that are available this year, I think it's another way we could evaluate this trade. Now, again, this is not a slight on Tesla, but when we talk about trade value, I want to know what your thoughts about. We gave up, what type of player we give up 81 and 100 to get Tesla. So what do you think about that?
I'm not as critical of trading up to get a guy because it matches with my philosophy on acquiring players in the draft. This is one stance where Jeremy and I have differed for as long as we've known each other. He is a proponent of saying, I want as many darts to throw at the board as possible. So that way, if I miss on a pick, I'm okay. I have the confidence of saying, I've done my research. I know this guy's going to be good. I want to go get that guy. So I never get too mad at the trade. It was a lot of capital, and it certainly takes players off the board now. But Tesla was a player that I felt like they needed last year. They felt like they needed him. And to move from where they were up to where they did, the value for what they had to give up was about what you would expect. So while I don't like being that aggressive overall, or I certainly wouldn't have been if I was in Brad Holmes's seat. I understand why he did it you look at his philosophy. Now, does that hurt him now? Maybe. We'll see how it ends up playing out, because is getting Tesla with getting a Tesla with 1 year under his belt, being a wide receiver 3 and not having to rely on other veteran wide receivers, and is that worth it? That's hard to tell. It really is. It depends on what Tesla ends up being. I still think Tesla is going to be a very large factor in what they do. And I know that, like with bringing on Drew and everything like that, like they're talking about shifting potential offensive sets. They're still going to use a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. The NFL just uses it. He's going to get a ton of play time. And so would I like to have picks, 81 and 100 or whatever it was? Absolutely. Absolutely. You would get quality players, but would you get players that could come in and be able to contribute right away this year? I don't know. Like, that's not typically how it works. Kirby took a year before he was up and running. Amon-Ra took half a year, almost a full year before he was up and running. Like, 3rd round picks typically take time. And so if they felt they needed to get a guy in-house that was going to be starting for them and ready to go, and they were willing to give up developmental picks for their future, that's what Brad does. Like, it's not always easy in the moment to see if it's worth it. And in hindsight, I think everyone's going to have their own opinion. I'm not bothered by it, because I think whenever we look back on anything, it's easy to kind of pick it apart. Whereas, in the moment, it's a tough decision, and he doesn't waver. When he wants somebody, he goes up and he tries to get it. And I'm comfortable with that. And sometimes it's going to be good and sometimes it's going to be bad, but you live by the sword, you die by the sword, I guess, in this situation. So I'm okay with it. I'd like to have him, but what are you going to do? Right.
Jacob, I want to know what your opinion is. I know what your opinion was last year, but with what we know now about this draft, what do you think?
I mean, you want the picks back. But the thing is, I mean, there was the potential that we could have still had those picks and we could have gotten Tesla. He could have been there. We don't know that. Right. And I mean, Brad Holmes, you got the players that you love, the players that you really want to go get, you're going to go get them. And if he blows up and has an amazing year this year, then no one's going to remember that anyway. Actually, no, I mean, unless he absolutely tanks, I think people are going to forget after this draft anyway. It's just such a big issue right now because this is the draft where we're feeling it because we want those picks. We don't have them. How do you feel though? Like, I mean,
you do want the picks, but I will tell you that, because of circumstances and stuff last year with Sam Laporta being out, the silver lining is that towards the end of the year, Jared Goff started to trust Tesla a lot more. And especially in that Pittsburgh game, the game on the line, he was throwing him a touchdown pass, right? Didn't catch it, but he was trusting him with that. And you saw that later on. And I'm not going to say he has the impact that Amon-Ra had, but it was a similar type thing where, like, absent for the first half of the year outside of 2 amazing catches in his first couple games, right?
Yeah.
And then he's pretty much absent. And then you start seeing him getting, non-trick plays, like non-go routes. We're getting stuff across the middle. We're starting to use him. And I think, you had that interview with Petzing. Petzing is going to use his tools at his disposal. And that is, Tesla's going to be a tool. That guy is going to be a dangerous red zone target, at least in my opinion. You put him and Laporta on the field together in the red zone, that's a dangerous combination, I think. So I don't know. What's your read on it? What do you expect from Tesla this year? While we're on the subject, Eric.
I still think he's going to be a little lower in the pecking order as far as targets go, but some of that is just the nature of what they're asking out of him. Similarly to like JMO a couple years when he in his second year, like he had a limited route tree. They asked him to stretch the field, keep secondaries honest, spread things out so that they could utilize Laporta and St. Brown in the slot. What you need with an X is you need an X to be able to catch contested catches, which he can, and you need him to be able to go run those like 15-yard dig ins, like, in those in routes and stuff, right? And when the stuff Josh Reynolds basically used to do, right? And if you have that guy, he's going to keep those safeties honest in a different way, because now they have to worry about the 15 in. They have to worry about the go from JMO. And as a safety, you're now preoccupied with these guys in the routes, and you're leaving one. If you're in a nickel, you're leaving one defensive back on Amon-Ra, and then the other slot guy the other guy on Laporta is going to be like a linebacker, and I'm going to take that. And if you put a big safety on Laporta, then I'm going to go to St. Brown. And so the beauty of the Lions offense is that you have a go, you have a deep in, you have the two different styles of slot, and those are your 4 targets. And then that's not even counting about the maniac in the backfield who can pretty much do everything in the passing game as well. And so how do you cover all 5 of those guys? Like, that's really what becomes a problem. And if they want to not pay attention to Slaw because they're going to cover someone else, Jared's going to throw it to him. Like, and if he can do it, all he's got to do is make 3, he's got to get 3 targets a game essentially. And if and then that's enough. That's enough to make the defense stay honest, keep the production, and just let everyone go. And it opens everything up for everybody. And that's why I think he was such a big deal for them. Is I don't think they thought they could get it in Tim Patrick. They wanted Reynolds, but he wasn't the right answer. And so they were looking for this X for about 2 seasons to really try and open the offense up. And I believe Tesla is going to be that guy. That's kind of like the final piece. And now you're going to have to cover somebody. You're either running 7 defensive backs, and then you're just going to get run over, or somebody's got a linebacker covering them, and who do you want? Just throw to that guy, right? So I think Tesla is going to be an important factor that's going to go beyond just like the stat sheet. And I think that's the vision they had with them. The other thing I wanted to point out with Tesla was, I know that we think maybe he might have been there like a little bit later in the 3rd round. And with that, I just want to point out, like, what we think we know isn't always like the case, because I look at the draft before that with like the Gibbs and Campbell and then Laporta and Branch draft. And we talk about how after day 1, we looked at Gibbs and Campbell and we're like, oh my God, they reached for both these guys. They weren't positions of need. They already had starting linebackers. Jack's not going to start. Gibbs they just signed Montgomery. Like, these are guys, like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then, 4 years later or whatever, we're here now and they're like, oh my God, these guys are studs. It makes sense on why they drafted them. And then Laporta and Branch were like steals. And we were like, oh my God, we got such great value on those guys. And like, if they would have been drafted in different orders, if those second round picks were the first round picks and the first round picks were the second round picks, that would have matched the national draft boards. And I think everybody would have looked at that and said, oh man, great value at every pick. Everything made sense. But Detroit just did it backwards. And that's just what Brad Holmes does. He doesn't care what the big boards look like. He doesn't care what your national draft analyst says. And we see it every year. It's like, hey, you guys think Tyreek is a second rounder? Well, we're going to take him in the late 20s, right? And that's one of the reasons why I started talking about Blake Miller when I did. Like, I'm like, hey, people think he's going in the second round. I wouldn't be shocked if Brad took him at 17, because Brad, his read on the board is always going to be different than, I think, what we think we know. And so it's all we're doing is guessing, right? That's where we're at with this. So
right. And then that's the deal, especially with Brad Holmes' history. I mean, you fall in love with somebody if you really like the potential and you really like what they're about, and if you think this person's perfect. Yeah. If you don't think he's going to be there and you want him on the team, that's your option. Is you have to move up and you got to get him when he's available.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, we fall into these habits. Everybody falls into these habits in the off season of, like, you use mock draft machines and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, if I could get this guy here and maybe to get this guy here, and everybody, all the national guys, all the guys I trust are saying this guy's going to be here later. So maybe I'll plan it. And then all of a sudden that guy goes like in the second round instead of like day 3. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, like, where did that come from? What we think and what we get used to is not always, I think, the way it is. Because these NFL teams, they're all have different boards. And what I found is Brad's tends to be wildly different than everybody else's, but he's got the track record that's hard to argue with too.
Yeah. He talks about doing things horizontally and vertically, and I'm sure he does that in the draft as far as, like, where to get the value and who's going to be available later on. So it is a mind, it screws up your mind a little bit, but there's nothing to argue. I mean, the results are the results, right?
Yeah. The stacking the boards like that, it's a fun concept because it does kind of give you like an overall picture of where you think things are going to go or how things are going to go. And for the most part, Brad's been pretty good at anticipating things. I mean, we hear this story, I feel like, every draft. It's like, well, this guy, there were 5 other teams that were hoping Jahmyr Gibbs would fall to them. And Brad just took him right before, and no one was prepared for Brad to do that. Same thing with Branch. There's rumors that the Packers, they wanted Branch. And what does Brad do? Jump right ahead to one spot ahead of the Packers and snags them. Right. And so there's so many stories like that where you end up like hearing after the fact through the grapevine or through sources that, like, Brad is getting in just before somebody else. Right. And so you have to respect that with him. Like, he has a great feel for what teams are thinking or what they might be doing and what a player's actual value is, and when is the proper time to go get him and when it's not. And, I'm sure there's a bunch of stories that we don't hear about, or I'm sure there's misses we don't hear about, but, for the most part, he's done pretty good with his timing on when to go get guys.
Yeah. He seemed pretty aggressive, after the first draft of moving up. And it makes me wonder if he missed out on someone. Like, he's like, I want that guy. He's going to fall to me. And he didn't. And he just said, you know what? I'm not going to, nothing's going to chance now. If I see a guy I want, like, he talked about, losing sleep over a couple guys, like, go to bed and wake up. And this is the guy I'm thinking about. I think Baki might have been one of those guys. Like, I need to move up and get that. And I mean, I guess there's some, you could talk about maybe spending too many resources, but I guess at the end of the day, at least you're going to respect. He's putting it all on the line. Like, this is my guy. I'm going to live by this guy. If I pick the wrong guy, then so be it.
Yeah, and like I said, I personally think that that's how you create a winning team, is to trust that you've done the work and that you've set things up and your team has built they've done their research, and you know what types of guys fit you. You're in line with your coaching staff on what the needs are and what's players, how they could fit where. And then, you make sure that you get the pieces that you think you need in order to make your team better. And this team has gotten better through the draft. But it was the first 3 years were just remarkable. And while the last 2 have been tempered down a little bit, he's still getting valuable players. Like my general philosophy on every draft is you want to go into the draft, and by the end of that season, you want to have 3 starters, 3 depth players, and 3 special teamers. And that includes like UDFAs and stuff like that too. But like that's the general philosophy that I think you should try every time you go into every draft is 3, 3, and 3. And I think he's done that. Every year he's at least gotten 3 guys who by the end of their rookie seasons were in starting roles in one capacity, or by the next season they're in a starting role. And you that's how you build franchises. That's how you get to a point where you can have sustainability. And if he does it again, he's going to set himself up very well for the future because he's got his foundational pieces. He's used the free agency to kind of fill some gaps. But if he hits on, like, let's say the first 4 picks, if he can hit on those guys and their contributors, well, that's 4 less spots you got to fill next free agency, right? And then if you hit again, like, you could set yourself up for like 5 years. You could set yourself up through, Jared Goff being 36 years old. And like, that's a window. And the philosophy that they're doing this offseason by reverting back into younger players, trying to get hungrier guys, trying to get that chip back on their shoulders, it all works if you hit on the first 4 guys. If you can get contributors and they hit, you're setting yourself up really well for the future. Now, if you miss, or if you gamble and you trade up, now you're in trouble. Now you've put yourself behind the 8 ball. So it's a little bit of a risky strategy going the route that they did this offseason, as opposed to just trying to do what they've always done. But I think it's an aggressive approach that could, like I said, it could pay off for 5 years if they do it right.
I love draft time. What do you think, Jason? We got time for one more?
Feel
Are
free.
you good,
Yep.
Eric?
Yeah, I'm fine.
right.
Keep going.
All right.
Everybody-
Go on.
I want to ask him this one about the safeties. So, do you think, the Lions, we re-signed Avonte Maddox, we signed Chuck Clark. Do you think that having those depth players is going to stop us from drafting a safety early in the draft? Or do you still think that safety, is possible?
I certainly think safety is possible. There's a couple reasons why I think safety is possible. One, I don't know the extent of Kirby's injury. It's all speculation to me at this point. I'm not a doctor, and even if I was, I still wouldn't know what's going on with Kirby's injury unless I was there examining him. And so I have no idea. I have no idea what's going to happen with him. With Branch coming off an Achilles, that tends to be a slow return for players that are in positions that require explosive movement. So while Branch could return, is expected to return this season, and it could maybe return earlier than expected, I think getting that explosion back is going to take some time. And so you always have to be careful with these Achilles injuries. Like it was a decade ago that if you had an Achilles injury, your career was over. So technology has improved pretty significantly, but it's a scary injury to have. And so you got to see how that plays out. You have Thomas Harper, who you're comfortable with, but you're comfortable with him more as a reserve than a starter. And everybody else is pretty much on a 1-year contract, except for Dan Jackson, who, again, you're developing, you don't know where he's going to be at. So there's not a lot of stability where you have questions that are answered at safety. And so I do think taking a safety could help them with stability, with some stability on the back end. Now, even if you return Branch to full form and Kirby's knee is a little bit overblown and both those guys are able to return to their all-pro Pro Bowl potential, I still like the idea of taking a safety if you're going to switch your defense, because they're in a position now where they can alter their defense depending on the players that they acquire. If they were to want to stick with the defense that they had last year, you're talking about adding depth on the edge, adding a third linebacker, and keeping your focus on those positions. And maybe you add a safety for depth in the latter parts of the draft. But if you're not wanting to stay in 3 linebacker sets, if you want to go to 2, well, then getting a safety might be a priority. And the way that they typically approach the slot is they like to have one cornerback who can play in the slot and one safety who can play in the slot. And right now you have Roger McCreary, who you signed to play your corner in the slot. And then you have a bunch of safeties who can play the slot, like Maddox, like Isian, right? Like they can play in the slot as well. But if you add another safety, well, you could play him in the slot as well. And if you add a safety early, who's a guy who's going to come in and start for you, let's say you take him at either 17 or 50, then you can run 3 safety sets and you can shift your base into a sub package, and you're running more sub package looks with maybe like a 4-2-5 instead of a 4-3-4 like they ran last year. So they're at a position right now where they can alter their defense with a player that's added without really having to do like a complete overhaul like a lot of teams have to do. So if you were to tell me a guy like Caleb Downs were to slide and then Brad Holmes trades up and gets him, I would say 100%, because even if, like I said, even if Kirby and Branch are back, you run 3 safety sets and you live out of that thing, and it's great. Or if you think they're interested in one of the other safeties, like Thiemann or McNeil Warren, and they want to take one of those guys, I get that too, because you can still run 3 safety shells, and then you've also put a full-time guy that you know is going to be a starting safety for the next 5 years for you. And where you use him is just depending on who returns, healthy. And so I would totally understand if they used a safety at either one of those picks or even later in the draft, just depending on how the board falls and how they have the players ranked. But I'm not ruling safety out at any point. And this is a good safety class. So I've got, let me see, I've got 9 guys that I think could probably earn a starting role in Detroit. 9 safeties. That's a deep spot.
Right.
Wow. All right.
Care to share a few players that might be like later, like towards the bottom of that list that you think could still be starters?
Sure. So Caleb Downs is my top guy, and then McNeil Warren and Thiemann, those are also guys that I think could be in play like at the first round. But when we get into like round 2, Keontae Scott out of Miami is my favorite. You put him at nickel and you are the happiest person in the world because you never have to worry about nickel ever again. You can also just run nickel with him at the nickel. You don't need that third linebacker anymore. You just say, all right, we're going to run 5 DBs, and that's going to be our base, like most teams do. He's technically under my safeties because I think that would be like the position he would kind of fall under, but you put him in nickel and you just walk away because he's in that spot's locked down. Tredan Stukes from Arizona is going to be next on my list, and he's not that far off. He's going to score very high on the grit index, and he's got a lot of intangibles that make a lot of sense. He's got great speed. He can play in the slot. He can play single high. He can play in the split safety concept. So he's going to be able to come in and he'll play. He'd be able to learn all 3 of those interior spots at safety, and then AJ Halsey is going to be in there. He's from LSU. This is a guy who is built like a safety, like a ball hawking kind of free safety, but he hits like an old school safety. He's an enforcer. So imagine Kirby, but he hits like Branch, right? That's kind of how I envision a guy like Halsey. Now he doesn't quite have Kirby's range, and he's not as explosive as Branch, but he's kind of a combination of the 2 guys. Bud Clark is a guy who I think you might end up, it's going to be in round 3 or 4. He's as close to a Kirby clone, I think, as there is in this draft. Good range on the back end. He's got a good nose for the football. He picks off a ton of balls. And you, if you need to, He's got a little bit of slot experience as well. I kind of like him in that Kirby role if you can get him there, but you can move him to other spots as well. Jalen Kilgore is another guy who's kind of more in the Brian Branch realm of things. He's more of like a drop-down rover. He could give you a little bit of a nickel, but he's also got great ball skills, good interceptions. And then the last guy on that list is Zaki Wheatley from Penn State. He's more of a split safety, a little bit of nickelback experience, but he's comfortable in kind of like your two highs. He could give you a little single, real good downhill run defender. I think he's a guy who could come in and maybe win a starting role if Branch and Kirby are both out, but then turn into something really good later. And again, I think he's kind of in that 3rd to 4th round range for me. So those are my top, what did I say, 9. And I think all of those guys could come in and compete for a starting role with the way things are right now.
All right. There's 2 things that stuck out to me, like that Dan Campbell has talked about. One was the salty players, like you mentioned it earlier, going back to that like 2 years ago. So I think that that's going to affect this draft, and that's why I think it's important to look at the grid index. Salty's a factor in that. The second thing that I think that Lions fans, we all need to be aware of, is that we all look at tackle as like this need that we need. We don't know that Brad Holmes feels that. So, but when you look at this roster, especially next year, we signed a lot of 1-year contracts. We have a lot of open spots that are going to be next year. So when you're drafting, you're not drafting for just this year. We're drafting for the future. So I expect something to be way out of the box that'll the casual Lions fan to be very upset with. For you, what are those sneaky needs that the Lions have? You've already mentioned it kind of with the safety, like, that depending on the injury situation. So what are some of those sneaky needs that you think the Lions could draft? And if you got a player or 2 that you're excited about, go ahead. I mean, I don't expect you don't need to go through your whole list, but if there's a player or 2 that really excites you, I'd be really interested in hearing that.
Do you have like a spot you're talking about? Like you're talking about like a surprise early,
Is there
or just
like what you view as a sneaky need? I mean, I can give you some spots if you want, like defensive tackle. I think
that's the one that I think is the least talked about. Yeah, is defensive tackle. They have some players, but there's questions with Levi. Aleem was clearly still recovering from his ACL, returning to form last year. You expect him to be back and better this year. But again, you want to see it before you feel comfortable. So defensive tackle is not a position that they addressed in free agency, and they lost 2 guys that were heavy contributors. And so when you read the tea leaves on that, it says, hey, getting a defensive tackle is something that could be a higher priority than what most people are talking about. So I don't like any of the defensive tackles in the first round, especially at 17. The only one I think might sneak in is Caden McDonald, and that's for the same reasons Tyleek did. He's a Tyleek clone. Literally, when Tyleek left the Lions, McDonald played Tyleek's position at Ohio State. And so he does the exact same thing, and he could sneak into the first round for exactly the same reasons. Is arguably going to be one of the best run defenders in the class, and I think he could sneak in. But for the Lions, you're not paying pick 17 for him. Now, if they trade back, maybe, but I'm not a huge fan of any of these guys really in the first round. But there's 5 of them that I think are guys that could, maybe 6, that could challenge for a really good heavy rotational role, could come in and you just rotate these 3 guys and you're comfortable, like Tyleek, Aleem, and then this 3rd guy. And if they were to grab one of those guys at 50, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Much has been made of the Lions bringing in Caleb Banks for a top 30 visit because he's a local prospect, so they could bring him in and it doesn't count against their top 30 numbers. But he's got a really extensive injury history, and a lot of times top 30 visits are used to do those medical checks. And I got a feeling that is really what that visit was all about. But at the same time, he's a guy that if he falls to 50, it'd probably be pretty good value for them. And so it's worth taking a look at him to see if he slides. Lee Hunter from Texas Tech, you're seeing him start to slide down too, because he's a little bit more, he's probably going to be a nose. You don't know if his pass rush is going to translate as much because of the position he plays. And when you have a nose tackle that you're not sold immediately on his pass rush, those guys tend to fall to day 2. Look, Aleem went on day 2, and he was a good pass rushing nose tackle. And so with Hunter, I think Hunter would be good value. Christian Miller he's going to be, I don't know, I think he would probably be used as like a nose in Detroit as well. But he's a good run defender. If he ends up in that range at 50, again, I could see them go that route. But with this draft class, if they don't end up going D tackle like in the second round, I do think there's a good, healthy amount of guys that are going to be there at the top of day 3. And that really is where I think if I were Detroit and I'm focused on like tackle and edge or something like that, and with the first 2, like most people want, I'd be looking at defensive tackles in that 4th round. And there's going to be a variety of different guys to choose from. Do you want a 4-eye? They're going to have one of those. You want a 3 technique? Well, they're the same thing. And nose tackles, great. They got something for all 3 of those spots, depending on what you're looking for. And so, I like that spot. There's probably going to be like, I don't know, 6 guys that are going to be there in like the 4th, maybe another 6 in that kind of 5th range. And those are guys that I think could come in and contribute in like a rotational role. They're not ever going to be guys that necessarily are going to challenge to start, but they're going to be decent rotational players that you can plug and play depending on which spot you're looking to get some depth at.
So Roy Lopez is a guy that both Jacob and I really like.
Yeah.
And, really wish he could have came back. That obviously didn't happen. What player do you have a player that in your draft list that say it's 4th, 5th round that stylistically is a Roy Lopez? Do you have anybody that sticks out to you like that?
The guy that I've been gravitating to a little bit more as a nose tackle is Albert Regis from Texas A&M. He's a really good run stuffer. He can play the nose. He could also give you a little bit of 3 if you needed. He's not the biggest guy. He's like going to be around like 300 pounds. So he's not going to be like the guys that they had last year, but he has a good anchor. He's pretty good against the run. He's going to remind people of being able to make an impact in a way like Poona Ford does. Like Poona Ford is undersized, but really good run defender. That's the type of guy that he kind of reminds me of. He's not as much of a Lopez, from a weight standpoint, but I think you could get good run to production out of him in a rotational role, and you could get him probably in like the 4th or 5th round.
Okay. That's good. What other position? Is there another position that sticks out to you, Jacob, that you want to ask Eric about in that same vein?
I guess maybe not like another specific position, but I guess who's like, who's the diamond in the rough? Like, who are you looking like 6th, 7th round that you think like, okay, this guy has potential. This is a sneaky player. Nobody's talking about him, but just somebody you personally kind of, would bet on any position. And it doesn't, not even necessarily somebody that the Lions would take.
Yeah. The hard part with me, and I totally get the question. The hard part with answering these questions is that if I like a guy, I tend to think that they're better than like a 7th rounder. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And so, right. And so it's not, I normally don't get that like until I'm in the draft when I'm like, I thought Dan Jackson was like a 5th rounder and now he's there in the 7th. So like that's value. But let me scroll through my list real fast and see if there's anybody that like really jumps out at me.
I just know sometimes when you're making these, like you said, you might have somebody like 4th, 5th round, and then, other people have him projected to be 7th or undrafted. And, it's a lot of popularity with the national writers. Starts going for the same guys.
There is a lot of variance this year with some of these guys' rankings, because there's going to be like, you're going to see like 3 or 4 like analysts you trust that are like 5th round grade, and then someone else is going to be like 7th. You know what I mean? And so like you get that with a lot of guys this year. And I think some of it is just because, like I said, that once you get past that 150 mark, then the guys, they start to blend again. So I'm trying to look for a guy that's like really low on somebody's board. I don't always think I'm pronouncing his name wrong. Let me see if I have it written down. I'm sure I do, because I
got the
B
stuff.
What?
Yeah.
Always got to have the beast up. They got the phonetic spelling for all these guys. It's so nice.
Needham, Tyler O'Needham, the
Yeah.
other Texas Tech or Texas A&M guy. He is a 4I, in my opinion. He played 3. Actually, at Iowa State, he played a 5, and then he transferred to Texas A&M, and they moved him to the 3, and he just kind of took off. I think the Lions could use him at like a Levi, where he could be like a 3 to 4I type guy. And if you've been running the PFF mock draft simulator, you've probably seen him available in the 7th round, like all the time. I looked at him as like I thought he was like a 4th rounder, like a 3rd or 4th rounder. I really liked him. And now as people are coming in with their boards, you're starting to see him on all the other boards as like a 3rd or 4th rounder, except for PFF, who has him as still like as a 7th.
Yeah.
But he like, that's the one where like, he's a guy where he's probably the highest guy that I have that still is getting a 7th round grade from someone, right? Like as far as the defensive tackles go, I told you I have like 6 guys that I think could challenge the start. He's 7. Like he's at the top of that next wave for me. And so if you got him in the 4th, I think that would be like a terrific value. And I'm not just picking the A&M guys because of Dan Campbell either. I just happen to just really like some of these guys. There's a couple teams that I've gravitated to a lot of their players this year. Texas A&M, Iowa, Clemson, a lot of those guys I think have ended up fitting well with what the Lions are doing. I'm sure there's an edge guy too. Let me just look at my edge stuff.
Yeah. People are going to be mad if we don't talk edge.
Yeah, like I think the guy who's going to stand out the most on my board when it comes to edge is going to be Gabe Akis. He's going the edge out of Illinois. On a lot of boards, he's going to be like, I don't even know what he is on the beast, but on a lot of boards, he's going to be like edge 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that, depending on whose board you're looking at. I think he's going to be on the Lions board like edge like 6. I really think he's going to be above other guys that are probably going to get drafted higher than him. Like I'm going to have him above Malachi Lawrence and Zion Young, who are both guys that people are now starting to say might go in the 1st round. I'm going to have Akis ahead on the Lions board of them. Cassius Howell, who almost everybody is projecting to be like right on the fringe of a round 1 as well. I'm going to have Akis above him because I think Howell's not a clean fit in the Lions system. I really like R. Mason Thomas, but again, I don't think he's a clean fit. And so again, I'm going to have Akis above like him as well. And there's some boards where Akis is going to be below all those guys. But I think for what the Lions look for from the intangibles off the field, he's going to have a huge grit score. I can just tell by everything about this guy. And I think he's going to fit stylistically. He's going to fit from a grit standpoint. And so it may not be like that big of a sleeper pick, because I think most people are going to have him as like a 2nd rounder. I just think he's going to be like a high 2nd rounder on the Lions board as opposed to a late 2nd rounder. And they're going to value him over a bunch of other guys. So Akis is a guy who's always kind of stood out in a similar vein to Blake Miller, because it's a guy who's looked at a little bit lower on the national boards than what I think he'll be on the Lions board.
He's 11th on the beast in edge rushers.
There you go.
Yeah, right. Cassius is 9, Zion Young's 8. He's right below our Mason Thomas out of Oklahoma. One thing that I keep going back to is what Dan Campbell said about being more hands-on with the defense, especially right after the season, and then talking with Shep about having multiple, like I think they said 3 different ways that they could go, and I think that's going to play into what the value is at this draft. So I think you're going to see the Lions, they could change, however they scheme their up there. Well, not really. Well, maybe how they scheme, but just the personnel that they put on the field based on who they have available. So where is that inflection point? Is that happening in the 1st, 2nd? I mean, where do you think
I think
that
it could happen either. Yeah. It really could. Because if they decide, what it's really going to hinge on is it's going to hinge on what you do at edge is going to impact what you do at linebacker. and what you do at linebacker is going to impact what you do at edge or safety, and what you do at safety is going to impact what you do at linebacker. And so you have, essentially what you have is you have 10 starters, and then that 11th starter spot is going to be a rotation of like 3 different guys depending on what formation that they're in. Okay. If they want to be like a 5-man front, then they're going to lean on their Sam as that kind of starter. If you want to be in a standard kind of 4-2 like sub package look with like a 4-2-5, then they're going to lean on that nickel to be that starter. And if you want to do a traditional 4-3 base like they did last year, then linebacker 3 is going to be that 11th starter. And so that 11th starter role is going to dictate what happens. If they decide we need a linebacker, then they may take a linebacker at 50 and be like, boom, we're running it back. Same exact style. Or they may say, no, we got to get an edge. And if we get this edge, then that's going to change it where we're going to be maybe more 5-man front heavy. Or they may say, hey, we need that safety. And now we're going to be more sub package heavy. So either one of those picks, 17 or 50, I think could change or could be a big indicator on how we see the defense shift depending on the player that they pick. I use this guy as an example on the midweek mailbag, but I'll use him again here. A guy like Jayshon Barham from Michigan.
Good. I'm glad you brought him up.
He was an off-ball linebacker at Michigan, but he was so good on the edge that they shifted him to an edge role, and he just is a complete modern-day edge guy. In Detroit, he could be a Sam linebacker from day one. He could be everything they wanted Derek Barnes to be, right? And just hasn't quite been. He can give you more pass rushing juice than Derek Barnes has given you. He has the ability to drop just like Derek Barnes does. He can set an edge just like Derek Barnes does. But if you take a guy like Barham, you're going to soften the need to get an edge guy because he's going to be able to fill that. But you're also going to soften the need to get a third linebacker because he can also kind of fill that role as well. And so now you have options where you're maybe going to lean your base defense a little bit similarly to what you had it last year, where you're going to have the option to go 5, like a 5-2 or a 4-3, but then it gives you flexibility. Now in my next defensive pick, am I going to maybe try and get that safety so that I have the option to go nickel more if I like a big nickel if I want to, or am I going to then try and stick in the trenches and really try and build that up so that I'm solidifying a 5-man front? So a guy like Barham, he would help solidify what they've done, but also give them that flexible range in a similar way that we were talking about safety before, where that safety could allow you to live in nickel, or maybe still you could be in a 4-3 if your safeties aren't ready. Like, it gives you that flexibility to be able to switch between things. That's kind of the beauty of the way the Lions scheme is, as complicated as it can be at times and as inefficient as it can be when you are dealing with so many injuries. There's a lot of flexibility in it if you get the right types of players that can be flexible in their position. And they have a lot of position flexible guys. So a guy like Barham at 50 wouldn't shock me at all, even though that would be considered like a reach, because most people have him as like a third rounder. But if the Lions took him at 50, I wouldn't blink. Like, I'd say I totally get that, because he's a guy that fits almost 2 roles for what the Lions do. He fills a Sam and he fills that kind of edge. He'd be a good rotational player with, oh God, what's the name of the guy they just brought in?
Wanham. You talking about
Wanham, thank you. Yeah. He'd be able to rotate with Wanham, play with Wanham. Like, he'd fit in well. And if you decide that he's playing well enough that you want to make him like your full-time defensive end, maybe a year from now, you have the flexibility to do that. You want to shift to a 3-4? Great. He can stand up and be a 3-4. And guess what? So can Aiden. He's done it before. Like, you can shift to 3-4. You can shift to 5-2. You have so much flexibility by adding a guy like Barham that, even though he's looked at on a lot of boards as like a third rounder, I think he's in play at 50 because he just does so much, would do so much for this defense and would change how they operate.
Also, I think about what Shep likes to do. He likes to disguise things, right? So if you guys that
Yeah.
play multiple, then you can move things around the field. When you talk about getting a safety with a nickel playing three safety, you don't, say Branch is out there with Keontae Scott. You don't know who they're going to send. They could back one out. They could play nickel,
Yeah.
switch them up. So there's a lot of different things that I like that, and I think that this draft has a lot of different options. My only concern is if we really want to tackle. To me, it almost seems like we have to give him in the first round. Like I just really worried that after that, unless there was a trade up or something like that, I would be really worried if we don't take him at 17 or whatever,
Yeah.
if we trade back or whatever. I do have that same feeling like you're worried if we don't get him there.
Yeah. After you get out of that top 7, who I think could all go in the first, there's a drop off. I don't think there's a guy who is a surefire starter over Borum. That I don't think any of these top 5 or top 7. The Maui Noahs, Fano, Miller, Freeling, Proctor, Caleb Lomu, Max Ahanachor. Those guys I think come in, win a starting job. After that, you're talking about guys who could challenge and maybe win a starting role, but there's no guarantees because they have even bigger flaws than the top guys do. For me, Caleb Tiernan is from Northwestern is kind of the next guy, but I'm not sold that he would win a starting role. Some people really like Jennings Dunker at tackle in this spot. I like Jennings Dunker more as a guard, but then I've said this before, there's a lot of people that I respect that think he can be a tackle, and I totally get that. So, but again, there's flaws that there's no guarantee he'd even win a starting job, right? So yeah, it's a lot harder for me to say grab a tackle in the second round because I think there is a very steep drop off in talent from those top 7 guys.
Yeah. I don't like the position that puts Brad Holmes in if he feels like tackles the need. I don't like that. But maybe that's why we're talking about Borum, just to throw the scent off a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, if you can get a guy that you think can challenge him and maybe rotate and win a starting job and you think the upside's there and you think Tiernan can do that, or maybe Markel Bell or Travis Burke, you think those guys can do it later, great. I just don't think there's a guarantee that they walk in and take over a starting job.
And I think if you're the Lions, you looked at what happened at the offensive line last year, how that, you know, derailed a lot of things that they wanted to do on offense. And, do you want to take that chance? You don't. You want to come in, you want to get the guy that you believe in. So to me, that speaks to getting in the first round. But, we talked about how unpredictable Brad Holmes is, so we don't know. But I am worried if, we decided not to go with tackle. We've run, Jacob and I have run mocks. If you don't get the tackle in the first round, it becomes very difficult after that.
Yeah. Yeah, then you're locked in on Bourne. The reason that I continue to think they're going to go tackle is because you don't really have an OT3 on this board on your team right now. Right now, Manu is your OT3, and I don't think they're comfortable with him being one injury away from starting. And so, to me, reading between the tea leaves, it sure looks like they're going to go get a tackle because they just don't have the depth there that I think they need. And you've seen them at other positions like safety, like guard, where they're just loading up on guys. And tackle is one of those spots where they just haven't. Defensive tackle, that's why that's a sneaky need. Like they just haven't. Linebacker, they just haven't, right? They only got 5 guys. Last year, going into the draft, they had 11 linebackers on the roster. Right? This year they have 5. So that either tells me 1, they're moving away from 3 linebacker sets, or 2, they're going to get a linebacker or 2 or 3. And in this draft class and UDFA class. And so, the Brad always tries to make the team where he doesn't have to chase needs, but at the same time, I think when you look at the spots he hasn't dedicated a lot of resources to, it does kind of point you in that direction. And like I said, it seems to be kind of up the middle. It's the tackles, it's the defensive tackles, it's edge, it's linebacker. Those are spots he didn't spend a lot of money building up this offseason, and that's why we end up talking about him a lot going into the draft.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Got anything, Jacob?
If we're gonna hold him a little bit longer, I have one more player to ask him about.
Sure.
So somebody that I like the upside of, but I don't know that necessarily fits the Lions. And we've been talking about linebackers. So there's a linebacker out of LSU, Harold Perkins.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on him? Because he's one that's also like they've got him 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. People don't know exactly where he's going to go. He had a lot of upside. He was projected like a top 10, top 20 pick, early on when he first started in college. And now here we are.
Yeah, as a freshman, he was a lot of fun because he was James Houston off the edge. Like he would come off the edge at LSU and the tackles could not handle his athleticism. And so early in his career, he was as dynamic as edge guy as you saw in college football. And that happens a lot. Like you get these guys, these freshmen that come out and they're just like, boom. And Perkins was like that. Then he has his ACL injury and he doesn't quite have the same juice that year coming back. And he decides, hey, I think I'm considering jumping to the NFL, but I only weigh 225 pounds and I'm an edge rusher. And so that doesn't really mesh in the NFL. And so he asked the evaluation board, like, if I jump to the NFL, what's my draft stock going to look like? What do you suggest? And they said, go back to school, learn off ball skills, and then you'll have a better chance of succeeding in the NFL. So he goes back to LSU. He asks him to start playing off the ball, and he's not as productive, but LSU still use him as like a blitzing option. They're still utilizing as athleticism and skills, but he's not able to ever regain what he had in the early years of his career at LSU. And so this is a guy with a lot of dynamic ability. He ran a 4.4 at the combine. And so you can see the juice that's there with him, right? But if you're going to draft him, you have to have a plan, right? Because he's not going to be a starting linebacker for your team. He looks like a will, maybe even a little smaller, but you can't play him at will because he's not really a cover guy. He plays more like a Sam, but he's not quite big enough for a Sam, and he's not quite big enough to really set the edge. And so he's basically in the NFL because of his frame. He's going to be like a situational type of player. He's a guy that you're going to throw out there on third downs and you're going to say, do this, or you're going to bring him in as like a hang defender or a little rover, or maybe you're going to blitz him in the A gap. Like you're going to have to have more of a specialty type role for him. And because of that, that's going to drop him to day 3 because he's not a guy that's really going to challenge for a starting role. But you get him in the 4th, 5th round, 6th round, whatever. I don't know where he's going to end up going, but if you have a plan for him and you get him on day 3 and you can turn him into a weapon, he'd be a lot of fun. Like he'd be fun to have on your team. You got to have a plan for him if you're going to take him. And it's got to be like, this is what your job's going to be.
Right.
All right, Jacob. I think we've kept Erik long enough. Okay. So Erik, before you go, we all want to know what's your plan with the Grit Index, like when it's going to release, and let everybody know how they're going to find it, and any draft stuff you got going on next week that you want to let the people know about.
Yeah. So I am at a point in my draft board where I'm in the final stages. I've just kind of worked my way through all 630 pages of the beast, and I've taken my information to get what I need onto my board. And now I've got my rankings basically where I need them to be, and I'm filling in just like some specifics. Like who are the team captains? Who are new players that I added that I got to fill in some stats, and then final rankings from a couple guys, like a couple of the analysts that I include. So I'm in the final stages of that. At the same time, Anthony with his grit index, he's in the same phase. So he's at a point where he is just adding in the details. And then what we're going to do over the next like 3 or 4 days is we're going to get our lists meshed together. We're going to look at the formula. We're going to see, is it working? Are there any flaws? Are we too heavy somewhere? Like, is it unnaturally favoring one position? Cause that's happened before where for whatever reason, like all the offensive linemen were like like 19 of the top 25 players were offensive linemen. And we're like, hold on, something's going wrong here with, this. And so we're going to be looking for, is there any weird anomalies that didn't show up? And then as we fine tune those, I'm hoping to be able to release the grit index at the beginning of next week. I'm going to basically I haven't determined how quickly I'm going to like unravel it, if it'll be like all at once or over like 2 days. Last time I did it over a couple of days, but it's going to be like basically like the grit scores and then a bunch of different guys. I'll talk about like a handful of different guys that trying to, explain the grade, explain the score type of thing. And then from there, we're going to do any final draft stuff in preparation, any late mock drafts that we have to pay attention to. We're doing a series of, these are the guys I like why the Lions should draft this player leading up to the draft. And all that's going to be a Pride of Detroit. And then over on the Patreon, for the Detroit Lions Breakdown Patreon, I'm going to have my latest board uploaded, and I'm going to have the complete grid index uploaded to that as well. So you'll have both documents and you'll be able to like look through and sort. They'll just be, like Excel type documents, and you'll have access to those to be able to look at like what, in more detail than what I'd be able to show you. And prior to Detroit, I'm going to give you like, what's the grade? And in the one that I released to the Patreon, you should be able to see like, okay, where did they score? Like, and be able to look and find, oh, they were heavy in these areas, and that's why this player made sense. And so we're going to have that available for you too. So over the next, like I said, over the next like 3 days, it's going to be all prepping and getting the final touches on. And then it's going to be like 3 days of just information thrown at everybody as fast as we can.
Yeah.
And then it starts, and then the draft starts. And
Right.
Yeah.
yeah. And then it'd be a lot of fun. Oh, by the way, you had mentioned, Jason, you had mentioned that about the PODD videos at the training camp.
Yes.
We also do a PODD video after day 1 and day 2 of the draft as well. And we'll have those for all the PODD subscribers as well. So those are fun. Last year, Jeremy and I got in a big fight on camera about the Tesla trade. It was very, very ugly. It was like 2 a.m, and we were both annoyed, and we just wanted to go to bed. And we misinterpreted each other, and we got in a little bit of an argument. Yeah, everyone got to see that
Nice.
fun side of how the sausage is made. That's part of the fun experience, right? Like you go and you have these. That's the passion of the draft, right? You have people that they really take a side, and they feel really passionate about why this is the way it should be, and why this guy is good or why this guy was bad, or and it creates fun conversations, and even if it gets heated sometimes.
That's all right. I mean, you and Jeremy are usually, in lockstep, like at least like what I see, my perception. I know that Jeremy has his, positional value hangups and stuff like
Sure.
that, but yeah, it's also fun to see you guys argue. I know I like to argue with Jacob all the time, so it's all good. Just to reiterate, the Patreon is well worth the $5 a month. I mean, it is. I'm glad to put that in your pocket. The PODD stuff, great value, because along with those videos, you get monthly articles. You get your own special midweek mailbag that is generally like it's 3+
Yeah.
hours lately, and
Yeah.
they will take your questions. They try to answer everybody's question for that one. So they really do take care of there's tremendous value, I feel, for the PODD customer. So if if you like Jeremy, you like Eric, and you want a little bit more of that, I it is well worth to look into that. Thank you again, Eric. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for
Absolutely.
being willing to go over and just talk. And I've learned a
course.
lot today. I hope our listeners have learned a lot. And yeah, 1 week and we get to pay some of this off, right? We get to talk a little
Yeah.
bit more.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's such an exciting time of the year because all the work, all the, studying, that everybody's put in, you get to see what it is, and you're going to have your heart set on some guys and they're going to go somewhere else, almost usually typically to your rival, which is terrible.
Yeah.
And then you're going to end up with like guys you didn't know about that are going to get drafted. And then you're going to be like, who's this Ahmed Hassanin guy? And like, and then you're like, oh my gosh, look at this stuff. And look at all, and like, it's fun. You get to learn personalities from these guys. And it's exciting time to see the next wave of people, because right now, what do they have? They have enough room for, let's see, 9 draft picks plus 12 UDFAs. So you got 21 spots. You're going to get 21, like, a week from now, you'll have 21 players, or, a little over a week, you'll have 21 new Lions, and people are going to be you're going to see in some of these guys that are going to be Lions for the next 5 years. And so, it's going to be it's always a great time. I always love this
what's
time
the
of
next
year.
jersey we're gonna buy, right? That's
right.
it, right?
Exactly.
All right, Jacob, got any parting shots? Anything that you're looking forward to, particularly with the draft, or what's before we take off here?
No, I mean, I'll just say it again. I love draft time. I love draft night. I won't be in Detroit this time, though. Going back to my, tradition of being at home with the kids, watching it live. I went
I
last
haven't
year with
decided
Jason,
yet.
Eric, and did not have a great experience.
We went to Ford Field, Eric, and they had a band almost the whole time playing music. And like Jacob and I want to listen to the draft, right? And the year
Sure.
before that I went, I think it was the first year they had, it was a fun time. You could go down on the field, we kicked field goals down there, then we watched the draft coverage on the big screen. And Jacob and I was expecting the same thing, but they had I think it's because the Lions picked so late last year that they just thought they needed to entertain the people. I'm like, it's like inviting someone over for a movie and then playing a really loud CD the whole time. Like, no, we want to listen. I wanted to hear Mel Kiper yell at someone because no one was drafting Shadur Sanders.
I was going to mention that. Yeah. The Shadur rant. We missed all of that. I was like, I could see him on the screen, but I was like, I can't tell what he's saying.
Eric, something that Jacob does. Are you doing this thing with your brother again this year, Jacob?
What, the mock draft?
Yeah, mock draft, and then you get points. So Jacob goes all out. Like, they do mock draft, they get points if you pick the player right per team, or if you get a position right, they get right. So like he goes all out. He loves the draft.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's something that I've covered for fun since Charles Rogers. That was the first draft when I really started like ranking players. And so that's like what, 25 years now, 24 years, right?
Don't date me.
Like I'm dating myself here, but I spent the first like 10 years after that just writing up stuff for my buddies, and I'd send stuff to them. I didn't use the computer at that point. I would build index cards, and because I wanted to make it just like a war room. And so I would make these index cards that would have a player's name, his measurements, one little fact about him, and then I would put like his little logo, and I'd put him on an index card. And I did this for like 150 players or something like that. And then I bought Velcro, and I would put a little Velcro thing on the back of all of these cards. And I made 2 sets of them. And then I built a board, like a ranking board. And then I built a rank by position board. And then when they would get drafted, I would take them off and I would put them at the spot where they were drafted in the round, and then take one off and put it on the team that they were drafted to. And then I would tape these up on my door wall. And now this was back when the draft was 2 days. I don't know if you remember back then when it was all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And this was like before a lot of me and my friends had kids and stuff like that, or at least they were young. And we basically just had like an open house party. People would come over. We'd have beverages off to the side, beverages in a barrel out on the deck, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And people would just come in and out for 2 days. And I had these whole big boards just up on my wall, and we would watch and move pieces and talk. And we did that for 2 days straight. It was amazing. It was so fun. And then the NFL started commercializing things and shifting them over the couple of days. I started doing my boards on the computer, and I discovered this thing called an HDMI cord, which I didn't know about. And I realized I could plug my computer into my TV, and then I could have 2 TVs, one with my board and one with the TV. And then I thought that was like, I was so savvy and stuff. And we did that for a few years. And then when I started writing, I was still doing the board, but I was just doing it for my friends. And then when I was writing, I started covering the draft as well. And so I was like, I've been formally covering the draft for 14 years, I think is what it is, like officially, like in a writing capacity. But yeah, the 10 years before I started doing it, as a writer, man, it was just a big party over at the house. Like it was like 2 days of just, I mean, people would come in and then leave and then come back hours later. They'd come with their wives, and their wives would talk, and then they'd leave, and then just my buddy would come back later. It was so much fun. It's kind of like
that was probably the peak of life, right?
Yeah, right. Like now I've got these like little like boards here where I have like my
That's awesome.
But it's essential. I haven't gotten away from it. I still like the physical, like being able to put my hands on things. Because it's like I've been doing this, like I said, almost 25 years now. It's a passion project. It's something that I enjoy, and I think it shows up in the product that I put out, like that it's something I like, and I like to enjoy and share with people. And I don't mind talking for a couple hours. And, so I know you guys wanted to go like 15 minutes ago before I started the story, but
no, you're good.
The only thing I will add is that you're talking about, the draft being 2 days. Do you remember the year that they did just the top 10 picks? Like one night was just the top 10 picks. They did that one year, and then they did the first round was split, and I hated that. And also, first round used to be at 15 minutes for every pick.
Right,
oh my God.
15 minutes. The whole draft was 15 minutes. And the first 3 rounds and the first day, and it was like 10 hours or something like that.
Yeah, it was
like a 10-hour day, and you're like 100 picks in, and you're just like, oh my gosh.
I know. The talking heads were just, there's only so much you could say, during that time, but they'd still go to commercial during the Lions pick. I know that for a fact. That always happened.
Yeah, you entertain yourself in a lot of other ways when you're waiting 15 minutes between each pick, So
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. We extended an extra 15 minutes. That's bonus for you guys listening at home. Erik, again, thank you. Jacob, you did awesome putting these questions together. Always talk a draft. We got 1 week, and then we get to have a lot more stuff to talk about. So we're going to leave just how we normally do. Let's go Lions.